Today on Listen Up, looking at the tragic truth in one of Canada's worst criminal trials. Welcome to Listen Up. I'm Lorna Duick. Today on the program, the trial of missing women that has put Canada's justice system into unprecedented challenge on a case which exposes just how evil humanity can be. We'll take you to Vancouver, where the stories of women whose deaths are now the focus of an enormous trial has launched resolve of never again. 26 murdered women, all of them desperate, drug-addicted prostitutes, whose final years were spent on the dangerous streets of Vancouver's downtown east side. That's where we begin today's program. Have you done this before? Been in her neighborhood?
I've driven through. This would be my second time here. I've never actually gotten out of the car. I've been a little bit too intimidated by the amount of people that are in need down here. It's overwhelming. It truly is overwhelming. It doesn't seem like Canada, quite frankly. It seems like a third world country. It's certainly not the Canada I grew up in. I'm a grown man and I find it intimidating. So to think of my sister alone down here in the night in these alleys surrounded by these types of people is truly frightening.
You never realized Mona was getting caught up here, did you?
No, we had no idea at all that she was on drugs or that she was a prostitute. As we raised her, she went to church. She did well. She was a sweet girl. She wasn't raised to be into this type of a lifestyle or to be involved with things like this. If we would have had any inkling whatsoever, we would have come and got her and put her into a private rehab facility. She was on a waiting list to get into rehab. There was no beds available.
Do you know how many years she was here?
At least 5 years she was here, minimum that we know of. I don't know what to do. I'm frustrated. I know what happened in my family. My sister got murdered as a result of a predator getting her that got a lot of other women. And you can see it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's 66 women missing. 27 we found body parts for. Where's the rest of them?
Where many of the missing women are and what happened to them, we may never learn. But the courts are doing their best to find out. Greg Joyce is a reporter with the Canadian Press. He has been covering this case for 4 years, and now he's writing about the trial for Canada's newspapers. He calls this an extraordinary case.
They all say that this is unprecedented in its scope, the size of everything involved. So the justice system, it's going to take a year for this trial, they say, because of the size of the evidence, the amount of the evidence, the DNA that's involved, the witnesses. The Crown says they have more than 200 witnesses. They have to be all cross-examined. So it's going to take a long time. During the first week that I was out there, the first 4 days of the trial, you could hear reporters talking to their editors at the desk about the graphic nature of some of the evidence, and it's salacious, it's graphic, and how much do how much do the newspapers want to put in print, because in print it's there forever. Radio, TV, it's the same thing. They're all wrestling with just how to deal with it. Some of the newspapers here have put warnings at the top of the story saying this content may be graphic and disturbing, so discretion is advised. I can't honestly say that any media outlet has held back in any way. They just provide those discretionary warnings, but anybody who's reading a newspaper, watching it on TV, are hearing it all. It's very graphic. No, I can't say that any media is holding back or using vague phrases instead of what we're hearing in court. What the jury hears is reportable, and I think all the media have been doing that. These are transcripts.
Mounds of evidence gathered over years of investigation, facts that reveal the most gruesome of details. It all adds up to horror. horror that somehow originated in a human mind and resulted in unspeakable evil. It almost goes without saying that it's got to leave some kind of mark on those who find themselves immersed in the details.
We are being offered counseling if we want it by our managers. During the preliminary hearing 4 years ago, I know of a woman who said she went for therapy. I know another woman who worked for a newspaper here who's not doing the trial because she couldn't take it anymore. And I know yet another woman for another newspaper here who did the preliminary hearing and said, I don't want to do the trial. Personally, I maybe just get immune to it, or because I've known these details for 4 years, and so it's the shock value of hearing this for the first time, as the jury did this week, and the public would be stunning. But it's hard for me to gauge that because it's just I've digested it for 4 years.
A professional distance that eludes the families involved. I'm sorry to be the person to have to take you down here.
That's okay. The devil took us down here. You know, he's the one that killed my sister. She was addicted to his drugs. So, you know, I'm glad. You know, it opens up my eyes. I need to see this. You know, I had no idea this was going on to such a degree. You know, just, you know, 2 blocks away from $1 million condos, we've got this. It doesn't look like Canada.
When Listen Up returns, trying to cope when faith in God faces the worst of evil and a world of personal regrets. Our question for you at home today: how can hope be recovered in Vancouver's East Side? Write to us at listenuptv.com. Listen Up is back looking at a 5-year-old mass murder case in Canada that is still taking the full-time work of more than 50 police officers. In February, the case against accused Robert Pickton finally went to trial, and dozens of family members began adjusting their lives again to the reality of the crimes. Mona Wilson was 26 when she was reported missing and is now the subject of the Pickton trial. She'd spent 8 years living with the Garley family as a foster child. Her foster brother explains. You didn't know about her life on the streets, did you?
Well, I learned about that side of Mona, drug addict, prostitute. I learned about that the day the police came to our house and told us that they had found her body. Immediately, we must have had that day probably 50 calls from media, cameras outside of the house, and phone calls from every radio and TV station and newspaper, wanting our reaction. That was the day the reporter, I believe from the province newspaper, told me, well, and I'd be quoting when she said, well, you knew she was a prostitute and a drug addict, didn't you? She was heavily entrenched in the Vancouver downtown East Side heroin trade. No, I didn't know that. And it was like somebody punching me in the stomach and pushing me off a high cliff.
She'd spent 8 years living with the Garley family as a foster child. She'd arrived there because her birth family was in jail, convicted of raping her prior to the age of 8. For reasons that still aren't clear, Mona was moved on from the Garley home at the vulnerable age of 15, and by 16 was given government support to live on her own, a decision which led her to find the cheapest housing prices available to her, the housing in Vancouver's downtown East Side. Greg, what went wrong in Mona's life?
Well, Mona had a stable home life with us. We had her for about 8 years. She went to Disneyland, she went camping, she went to church, she went to school. She was raised with us to go to church and live a normal life after being rescued from the horrific upbringing she had had before she got to us. This was a girl that was raised in horrific abuse, sexual and physical, and had to spend months in a hospital recovering from it, came to live with us, had a stable life for so many years, and then was tossed back into the chaos.
Some people, we walked amongst it, and it is an overwhelming place to be in. Some would say it just can't be helped. These are society's throwaways. What's your reaction to that?
I'm angered by it because every one of those women had a family, had a mother, had a father, had somebody that loved them in their lives. Somebody somewhere loved those women. Those women got off track, and anybody can go off track. It doesn't matter who you are. Anybody can have a bad day, a bad moment, a distraction, and that's all it takes. Sometimes it may be driving your car and you hit someone in a crosswalk. You're going to jail. You're going to be around people that you never imagined you would be. Anybody can have those things happen to them. Unfortunately, it was to Mona.
You have a very different memory of Mona than what you're hearing in the court this week.
Sure I do.
Tell us what it was like being.
Well, with Mona was a wonderful young lady. You know, she was a pleasure to be around. She was feisty. She was full of life. She was no pushover. You know, she used to, if you took her doll, me and one of my brothers, you know, you'd toss it over her head, you know, back and forth, just to, you know, annoy her or something, you know. Because it was fun. She'd just run up to you. First she'd tell you, you know, don't make me mad, and she'd wag her finger at you. And then she'd walk up and boot you both in the ankle, you know, like she was no pushover. She wasn't about to just sit there and cry. She'd wallop you one. But she was fun too, because she was always good-natured, always smiling. She was a pleasure to be around. We spent time at Disneyland. We went on camping trips. We went on fishing trips. We had a great time. You know, I don't have bad memories of Mona. I have sad memories because she's gone. You know, but I wouldn't have missed that time with her for anything. I just wish it would have went on forever, and I wish that we knew what was going on in the end stages of her life and that we could have been there to help her.
You are a person of faith. How do you reconcile what happened to Mona with the reality of God being in this world, supposedly looking after us?
You know, God had nothing to do with this. This was the devil's work. This was nothing to do with God. This was an evil demon that was unleashed on the most vulnerable. And, you know, I think there's a few things in the Bible that says what happens to people that go after the most vulnerable and the weakest, you know, among you. You shouldn't do it. You know, it makes my faith strong. It doesn't make me question my faith, because evil's always existed and always will. I'm just startled by the degree of evil, because I never thought I would ever be touched by that degree of evil and that amount of pure hatred for another person.
Do you have any redeeming hope for what could be at the end of the road of all of this for you?
One thing that I wish is that every church would fund, you know, 1 or 2 treatment beds for rehab that is away from the downtown east side, and spirits these women away from this life, because these women would make, a lot of them would make great mothers, great wives. You know, they're employable. They've had, lots of them have been to school, have gotten education. The problem is drug addiction is the problem. Bottom line and period. That's it. It's drug addiction that leads them here and enslaves them and keeps them here.
If you could see Mona one more time, what would you like to tell her?
I wish I would have known. You know, she protected us by not telling us what happened, what her life was like, and I'm just sorry. Obviously, she was too scared to tell us or intimidated, where I wish she would have just said she needs help. And, you know, I think sometimes we need to learn to ask, what's going on in your life? You know, if you don't see someone for a few months, for heaven's sakes, for God's sake, phone them up and see what they're up to. You don't know what has happened to people. You know, if I would have known what was going on in Mona's life, I'd have done anything to get her out of it, and we would have. She wouldn't have been in that, whether she liked it or not. She would not have been a drug addict and prostitute.
Life raced along, and the monthly phone calls just seemed...
That's the thing.
Got tricked into not realizing.
We're a very busy culture. We have so many things to do. You know, there's always something happening, and you better start your Christmas shopping in August, and all these priorities. And, you know, we forget that there's the forgotten people out there that sort of drop out of your life, and you suddenly don't know that they're going through pure hell, and then you find out they're dead and you think, well, where was I? And why wasn't I able to help?
When Listen Up returns, bringing hope back into the lives of those lost in the world of addiction.
Closed captioning provided by Duca Financial Services Credit Union. Discover more affordable banking at duca.com.
Listen Up is back looking at Vancouver's trial of missing women. The horror being uncovered at this trial has strengthened resolve that the voices of those who work with the vulnerable cannot be ignored. We turn our attention now to the work of over 85 agencies and ministries that try to bring healing to 16,000 people who live in Vancouver's downtown east side. These charities tailor their approach to suit the resources they have. Each act of care and prevention is shaped by the philosophies and personalities that sacrificially work here. At Jacob's Well, a young team renovated a decrepit building into what they call an industrial farmhouse. Every item here is recycled from salvage. The decor at Jacob's Well resembles their philosophy that old can be made new, lost can be found, broken can be beautiful. Explain what it is that is so deeply missing in the downtown east side story.
I think part of it is we've perpetuated a taking mentality, and I don't know exactly how to change that. Our part is just one little piece, and there are others in the neighborhood who are trying to address it. But what's happened is you've got, you can get fed 7 times a day, or you can get a shower, or you can get your clothing washed for you, or you can get free clothing, or there's a lot of getting, but there's not a lot of invitation for people who live here to give, and I think that dehumanizes them. So we've tried to create a place of belonging, a sense of family, as a faith community, sharing lives together in this neighborhood where it's both a give and take. And for us and for our friends from the neighborhood, we have a very much a we mentality instead of an us and them. So it creates a different dynamic.
Do you think that it's better downtown here now than downtown east side than it was when the missing women were being ignored? Have we made progress? Some people say we haven't.
I think in some ways, I mean, it's a bit inflammatory to even mention, but the safe injection site, we think it's actually brought help to our neighborhood. Maybe it's better to participate in one thing that's bad to prevent a worse thing happening. And I think people dying behind dumpsters because they don't actually believe that they're loved or cared for is not helpful. It's harmful, and you can't love someone who's dead. You can't help them find hope and salvation and transformation.
Your theory for solution really is to make this a normal neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think bigger things need to be addressed. Things like, if all the social service provision is here, this is going to stay here. So why don't we have people being able to relocate in 2 directions? It's very hard for people like me to live here because there's no housing provided that I wouldn't be taking from the poor. So I don't want to rob my friends of housing that they qualify for, that I can get elsewhere but they can't. But we would like to live in and among. You're going to change a socio-structure if you have people living in and among. If you have diversity, it's going to change things, isn't it?
What was the tipping point for you to be involved like this and make neighborhood here?
I'd been teaching about justice issues for about 4 years. I had been a pastor who began to read the scriptures quite differently and began to see things I'd never seen before. Namely, something that I would say that began to jump out at me everywhere in the scriptures was that God had this particular mandate for those that were marginalized in culture and society, whether it's the widow or the orphan or the foreigner or the poor, and that this is the essence of what it means to be a faithful follower of Yahweh.
In 2001, Joyce took her new understanding of what it means to serve God right into the heart of Vancouver's poorest district. There she met an elderly woman named Pauline Fell, the founder of Jacob's Well. Now 91, Pauline is still on the streets working in Eastside Vancouver. She's spent 25 years strolling the East Side, building friendships with those who reside there.
I met Pauline, who was 85 at the time, and thought I should spend some time with her. She's full of the Lord and I could learn. And so I wandered around the streets with her for some days. She goes through the alleys and the bars most days, visiting with her friends and praying for them and encouraging them, giving them scripture. And so after a few days of that, or maybe even a couple of weeks, I went away to teach, and when I came back, she sat me down in the community center and said, I think God sent you here to run this place. But we didn't know it was going to be. So I kind of fell into it by accident, to be honest, Lorna. I didn't
And how long ago was
plan.
that?
5.5 years ago.
Wow, so you've been building this.
Right.
And this is an incarnational project
Yeah.
of becoming and living and
Yeah,
hanging
it's
out.
trying
and
to build relationship with people in the neighborhood and really share life together like a family. So we're not an organization in the classic sense. We're a community of faith that is sometimes organized.
The kitchen at Jacob's Well is a cheery place, a place where family and friends gather and share life together.
Well, part of what we believe is if we live the normal Christian life, which has actually become not that normal, people will want to follow Jesus. So when we go and visit our friends who are sick or handicapped, or we bring them food because they can't get to the food bank, we always pray together, and they pray for us, we pray for them. We invite them to speak to God, and whether they have surrendered their life to Jesus yet or not. But then there's a process they come to where all of a sudden they might discover that they are believing now, and they didn't believe before. Or Jesus is answering their prayers, ironically sometimes a lot faster than he answers ours. So it's been interesting because the ones who are coming to know Jesus are seeing that he is present for them and interested in them, and not just to fix them or to heal them or to transform them, but to use them to minister to us. So it's been quite powerful in that. And then, will they all get free of their mental health struggles or their addiction cycles? Or I don't know, Lorna, but I do know that people can follow Jesus and have great struggles. And that's true for me and you and a lot of people sitting in church. It happens that some of our friends are just a bit more honest about their vulnerabilities. So we're going to be faithful with what we're given. And that what we're given might be brief. It might be that we only know someone for a handful of months, or we might know them for some years. So as long as we're able to journey, then we're going to be faithful to it and practice a real demonstration of the love of God and a shared life as best as we know how. So we think that the kingdom calls us to that. Jesus was a friend of sinners. He sat at the table and ate with people that were marginalized and rejected by the culture. And there's very specific bits of scripture that it seemed to indicate to us that you're to go to the ones who are on the outside. So we're just trying to figure out how to do that, and we don't have it all figured out yet. We're learning.
Joyce believes there could be a lesson we can all learn from this tragic tale of Vancouver's downtown east side. Maybe the lesson of the missing women of this terrible chapter in the story of one desperate Canadian neighborhood is that turning our eyes away from humanity's despair is not an option. There is only darkness down that path. It is, in fact, better to struggle with the struggle.
Yeah, and we should engage in the lament and be present to the pain. It will change us, and it will transform, hopefully, others. It'll transform. It's a mutual turning. We need to turn and look at what is painful and difficult and ask the hard questions. And we need to call people to turn toward communities of hope. And that's a very difficult tension here. There is a movement happening, and not just with us, to really share life. And I think if, God forbid, something like this was to ever happen again, more people are known, actually known by name, and their presence would be missed and they would be noted, and not just by families who are further away, but by families who are present here. And that's our hope. It's our hope that people's lives will actually count and we'll see them for who they are.
Our question for you at home today: how can hope be recovered in Vancouver's East Side? Write to us at listenuptv.com. And from our viewer feedback last week, here's what some of you had to say about our selective parenting program. I do support the right of life that children with Downs are due, but don't encourage the death of any baby. Over 40 million babies have been murdered since 1973. Think about that. God has given children as a gift. It's only selfishness that drives people to have their precious babies murdered. Another wrote, "There are so many areas that are downright scary, such as science trying to take over God's job. In answer to your question, what is your moral compass? I agree, the Catholic Church's view on the right to life from conception to natural death." Today we looked at the lessons being learned from the Vancouver missing women's trial, and as I listened to regrets that are all over that news event, something always surfaced: relationship. The murder victims were badly failed by relationships, most of them in their earliest days, others by their own choice to shut out those who tried to care. Eventually they became hurt people who hurt themselves. Isolation became dangerous, and sheer evil attacked the most vulnerable. One family member called the entire tragedy Satan's work. What could God's work look like? It would be living out the qualities of God that are all about relationship. It would be relationships that help us fight sin, relationship qualities that find their root in knowing God. We've listed on our website some excellent ministries that are not giving up on being relationship with the addicted population of East Side Vancouver. We've also listed social service agencies that will help you foster children who are at risk of losing healthy relationships. And finally, you'll also find discussion links to explore a relationship with God. Check it all out at listenuptv.com. Our question for you at home today is, how can hope be restored in Vancouver's downtown East Side? Write to us at listenuptv.com. I'm Lorna Dueck. Thank you for looking with us at a spiritual perspective behind the news.